August 2022, the Southern Arizona chapter of SAF, the Society of American Foresters, got in its second field trip since the pandemic. Progress on the way back to normal.
This trip was up the Santa Catalinas, right next to Tucson, to Mount Lemmon to see forest management issues around Summerhaven, the mountain community on top.
Let me guess. Fire and bugs within the wildland-urban interface?
You've got it. Let's get rolling.
On the way to the rendezvous site, a couple of us stopped to collect tree cores from dead Aleppo Pines.
Tucson is heavily planted with Aleppos for shade and aesthetic appeal, but currently something is causing them to die.
Here, for example, 5 mature Aleppos that were green and alive last June, but then they just up and died in July.
Hypotheses for what is causing this include yet another fungus borne by yet another beetle. But in truth, it's not known for sure what's behind this mortality event.
The ring growth samples collected from these trees show this much. No unusual decline in radial growth prior to death. These trees died fast.
Puzzling. Either way, foresters are mulling this situation over, trying to figure it out.
Tucson has a lot of Aleppos. Check out this aerial photo, an urban park full of Aleppos. So this is potentially serious.
It'd be not unlike the loss of American elms, which was catastrophic for urban forestry across the U.S.
And check this out, a first for me, tree coring right off the tailgate of the truck.
Clever, but do self-respecting dendrochronologists really do such things as this?
Well, the Arizona Tree Ring Laboratory turns 85 this year, and maybe there's a first time for everything.
We convened at a coffee shop to get organized. Several SAF foresters and several employees of the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, DFFM.
Nice emblem. A saguaro and a conifer right next to one another.
Yes, Arizona Forestry promotes healthy forests and healthy deserts throughout the state.
And they engage in much public outreach, so they have nice rigs, too.
We also tanked up on pre-trip goodies at the coffee shop.
Oh, the usual forester fare? Rock-hard maple bars and ice-cold coffee?
Nope. These days, fancy coffee with designer foams and frou-frou gooey pastries are much more popular.
I still prefer my coffee with an onion at the bottom and in a forester's cup.
The drive up the mountain passed through the usual ecosystem stacked at different elevations, starting with the Sonoran Desert down at the bottom.
We didn't happen to stop here, but let's not forget the finest desert in the world, complete with trees like mesquite, among others.
Perhaps not an emphasis back in forestry school. Mesquite is a critical arboreal component of this region.
Not to mention the source of tasty pancakes, which is our chapter contribution to the auction raffle fundraiser at National Convention every year.
The Sonoran Desert is just one of North American deserts that influence biodiversity in the American Southwest.
That's right. There's also the Chihuahuan Desert, contributing its own set of plants and animals to the mix here.
We also passed up the next ecosystem on the mountain, the Madrid Oak Woodland. This forest type is also interesting, but just no time today to stop here either.
So, not to brag, but a nice Forest Service pub on this ecosystem was authored by local SAF members.
Hey, it ain't bragging if you've done it.
The Madrid woodlands originate from the Sierra Madres of northern Mexico, an important biogeographical influence on the American Southwest.
Important culturally, too, as the southwest section of SAF meets with the Chihuahua section of AMPF every 2 years for forestry talk and field trips.
And we even passed up the mid-elevation Ponderosa pine belt, though an undergraduate course I co-teach, called A Sense of Place, stops here all the time.
Doing the famous thumb trick for determining stand level basal area, I see.
Yep, classic forestry school stuff. And notice this stand, all one species, all the same size, all about 100 years old, no understory.
I bet your students thought this was beautiful, but you probably set them straight on form and function standards for forest health.
First time for most of them hearing the question, can you ride a horse through this forest?
Our destination on this field trip was 8,000 feet in elevation and into the Rocky Mountain mixed conifer zone.
Don't look now, but the Rockies are yet another source area for the high biodiversity of the Southwest.
Sheesh, that map is getting some good screen time in this video. It should be made into a patch.
Good idea. Once we arrived in this ecosystem, we did what foresters do best, walk around in the forest and discuss how to manage it.
Well, like the t-shirt says, it's all good in the woods, even standing out in the rain in the woods.
So, mixed conifer? Like what? Pines, Douglas fir, true firs, junipers?
Yep, all that, and even quaking aspen and maple, no less. We might as well have been playing John Denver songs on our iPods.
Yeah, don't forget the wildflowers, and reptiles, and forest birds. Plenty of those up here as well. I love the loud calls of the acorn woodpecker.
This forest zone is diverse and productive, even here in southern Arizona, which is often thought of as nothing but hot, stinking desert.
And this forest is a nice place to live, or at least to have a summer cabin.
A patch as well, I see. You sure like the patches.
Yes, and plenty of patches depict cabins in the woods.
It might be hazardous, though. A house in these forests, fire-prone as they are.
Also, yes, this is risky. Cabins up here do employ some fire-safe features, such as steel beam foundations, metal roofs, and flame-resistant siding and decks.
Good. Still a bit more biomass reduction might be called for, right? Around each cabin, don't you think?
Yeah, perhaps. Here's a cabin with trees marked, but apparently these are the leaf trees, so not much thinning to be done here.
Foresters can make recommendations for stand densities around cabins, but ultimately it's up to each cabin owner to fireproof their property.
By the way, is this what is meant by the expression ladder fuels?
An actual ladder out in the woods? Not quite. The pine in this image is southwestern white pine, which keeps live branches all the way to the ground, which indeed makes it a ladder fuel for transferring fire from the ground to the canopy.
The fire danger here is not merely hypothetical. In the last 20 years, 2 named fires have burned the top of the mountain, including cabins.
The 2003 Aspen Fire and the 2020 Bighorn Fire both burned over large areas of the highest elevations of Mount Lemmon.
As is often the case with forest fire, the severity of burning at any given spot varied widely, with at least half of the area burned experiencing low severity in both fires.
Still, cabins were lost or threatened, so this really is a tricky wildland-urban interface.
As for patches, there are hundreds with Smokey Bear on them. Notice the message here: prevent wildfires.
Yes, the goal is not necessarily to prevent fire totally, which isn't realistic, but rather to avoid the damaging out-of-control fires.
To illustrate what could happen with fire in an area cleared of excessive brush around buildings, here is a time-lapse video of day 13 of the 2020 Bighorn Fire, the day it made it to and through the Summerhaven area.
As day breaks, smoke rolls across the sky.
Yep, there's always the smoke.
Midday, it's inevitable that the fire will reach this spot, so fire crews hastily reduce ground fuels around this building.
Just in time, I'd say, as the fire finally arrives and burns this whole scene. The buildings here were not consumed.
A reasonable outcome, all in all, as the sun sets on another day of fire in American forestry.
An additional discussion point on this field trip was management of bark beetles.
These are small insects that burrow through the bark to get into the cambium just inside the bark, leaving grooves called galleries in the outer wood.
Trees can survive minor infestations of beetles, but too many beetles and trees succumb and die.
Tree mortality by bark beetles is pretty obvious, as recently dead trees still have their needles and can be standing right next to trees that are alive and healthy.
Like the forest ecosystems themselves, beetle populations vary by elevation, but a common species throughout the West, including the Catalinas, is western pine beetle.
Foresters advise removal of specific trees killed by bark beetles, as well as general thinning to reduce the likelihood of beetles spreading from tree to tree.
Similar to management goals with fire, eliminating beetles entirely is not realistic. So the management goal here is more how to live with bark beetles and avoid severe, large-scale outbreaks.
And thinking back to Tucson's Aleppo Pines currently dying, a bark beetle has been implicated in that urban forestry situation and therefore merits its own management attention.
Good field trip, everybody. We might not have solved the forestry issues discussed on this trip, but it's always great for foresters to spend a day in the field talking trees.
Thanks to DFFM for insights on wildland-urban interface forestry.
Well, now that we're back doing field trips, where to next for Southern Arizona chapter, you think?
How about the central Oaxacan highlands?
Oh, bold. Or double down on that with the Andean Araucaria stands of Chile?
Nice, also. But triple down on that with the rainforests of Bali.
Any trees on Mars?
Better pack a few more rock-hard maple bars.